I came across a video recently that sort of reinforced my understanding of a Judeo-Christianity myth, or more accurately, a Judeo-Christian lie. Simply put, Christianity is not an indigenous world religion. It was adopted and retrofitted by every single pagan tribe it came into contact with. The idea of Christianity itself is originally a misinterpretation of Judaism. It was organized by a small sect of Jews who themselves had no interest or plan in converting other peoples to their heritage. The God of Abraham said that he will be a father to many nations, but this is predicated on the tribes and descendants of Abraham himself, not symbolically interpreted like Christians think it is. Our understanding of monotheism is dependent on Jewish tradition of maintaining one supreme God, one creator of life itself. This is problematic for traditionally pagan countries who would have had multiple patron deities, but widely different from one another, as different as we human beings are from each other. Now, the rest of the world was utterly unknown west of Egypt to the ancient Israelites. As far as they knew, the world couldn't possibly have had constant jungles in parts of the world and frozen tundra in others. Their tale of creation is inherently colloquial, not universal, and let alone scientific. It's a mark of moralization as far as they're concerned. Other peoples in Europe had their own stories and origins of humanity, but we have no record of their side of the origins. Or if we do, they're pressed into the mold of Christianity. This video I just mentioned a little bit ago predicts that some sort of pagan revival is not only inevitable, but crucial if modern European civilization is to survive. It's obvious if you look at traditional Catholic and Orthodox practices that native non-Jews of Europe are simply not built for Jewish practices. Even in scripture, the Apostle Paul tries so hard to reconcile paganism with Judaism, covenant law, by sidestepping many of the finer commandments directed at the Jews. But even this was no match for Europe's inherent tradition of art, partying, and simply doing all the things that both testaments forbid. It's in a European's DNA. Jews can easily trace their origins despite the myths and misconceptions from Gentiles. But for that matter, some Europeans can barely trace their own origins. We don't know where the Magyars came from in Hungary. All we know is that they ended up in what is today Hungary, and that they're linguistically isolated from their neighbors. Why didn't other tribes in Europe have genealogies? Why were some nations so self-conscious and insecure after the adoption of Christianity? Some of the early converts were very successful at certain points, and at other times they were bitterly defeated by an even bigger parasite to Judaism than Christianity: Islam. Paganism didn't die in the Middle Ages, at least not in the psychological sense. Modern scholars agree that some sort of pagan way of thinking absolutely remained in Europe to this day. Only relatively recently in history has it been relooked at and rediscovered. After all those devotionals and local patron saints, none of it screams Jesus anymore. None of it screams, we worship a Jewish carpenter. After all this time. It's all posed by the question, why should Europeans and those of European descent shun their pre-Christian roots? Because they were immoral roots? Because we were ignorant to the so-called truth of Christ? This feels like an unbelievable dismissal to what defined places like Rome, the Hunnic Empire, Dacia, Old Scandinavia, and archaic Greece. We still know practically nothing about how these peoples managed to survive without a Bible. They had it in them to make their own way in life before the globalization of ecclesiastical Latin and the papacy. This should be considered a criminal far cry from the cradle of Judaism. But it's too late. Christian history is now part of world history, and the individualism of paganism is lost to time. And with that, you could say that a part of ourselves are lost to time. We'll never truly know what could have been inherited in terms of myth-making, views on each other, and tales of the human experience. And right now, the Western world is facing an existential crisis. Hence, my username. What must we do for our own sake to salvage our past and set our future? We have no right to be ashamed of how our ancestors simply survived. Had they not done any means necessary, we wouldn't be here. Of course, there was war and slavery. You can't be a living organism without escaping some sort of food chain. And even then, ways around social hierarchy were invented and put to great use in the greatest nations of our modern time. We've seemed to have forgotten that much. And as always, thank you for watching.